Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you might be. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to the opening plenary of this global conference, Catholic Peacebuilding in Times of Crisis, Hope for a Wounded World. Before I begin, note that simultaneous translation for this session is available in Spanish and French. Please choose the appropriate translation room to hear the entire presentation in your preferred language. The button is located along the bottom of your Zoom screen on the right. A portion of today's plenary will be in Spanish, so English speakers should also choose a translation channel if they would like to hear the translation for that presentation. So now would be a good time for everyone to choose the translation that you would prefer during this presentation. I am Jerry Powers. I chair the steering committee of the Catholic Peacebuilding Network, or CPN, and I'm director of Catholic Peacebuilding Studies at the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies of the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame in the United States. With a secretariat at the Kroc Institute, CPN is a network of 24 bishops' conferences, academic institutions, development agencies, and peace organizations. For the past 20 years, CPN has sought to enhance the study and practice of Catholic peacebuilding. We have done this through global conferences like this, our 7th, as well as more focused events, through publications, including a new book on peacebuilding and mining, and a forthcoming book on nuclear disarmament, and through accompaniment of Catholic peacebuilding efforts, especially in Colombia, Mindanao, and Central Asia, and Central and East Africa. Let me say a word about the conference before I introduce this plenary session. On the conference site is a moving prayer of the faithful by over a dozen peace builders from around the world, each praying in their own language. This prayer of the faithful highlights many of the crises the Church's peacebuilding work seeks to address. Similar litanies of today's crises, both global and local, are repeated in the prayers of the faithful in our churches around the world every day. There's no need or time to repeat the litanies of crisis here. But can anyone be surprised that the Global Peace Index is at its lowest level in 15 years? The good news is that the Catholic community, almost always working closely with other religious actors, civil society groups, multilateral institutions, and governments, is responding to these many crises we face in a host of different ways. This conference highlights a broad spectrum of the Church's response. My hope is that you leave this conference inspired and convinced, if you aren't already, that the Catholic Church is a peace-building church. It is a church that, in its teachings and how those teachings are lived out, is engaged in preventing violent conflict, limiting and stopping it when it occurs, and promoting rebuilding, healing, and reconciliation after the violence ends. We are a peace-building church. I also hope that you leave this conference challenged. Challenged because too much of the Church's peace-building work is unknown, unheralded, and underanalyzed. Moreover, we know that there's much more that the Catholic community can be doing to realize its full peace-building potential. This conference convenes a wide range of Catholic peace builders from around the world. Artisans of peace who are trying to bring the Sermon on the Mount into the lives of individuals communities, and nations torn by conflict. We have invited some 75 of the world's most creative, committed, and courageous peace builders who are working on some of the world's most intractable problems to participate in 20 sessions over 4 days. No doubt, we have too many panelists and too many sessions for a world suffering from another crisis, the crisis of too many webinars. But we have far too few to represent even the work of the Catholic Peacebuilding Network and its affiliated institutions, much less the full breadth of peacebuilding being done by the 850 or so of you who are registered for this conference, not to mention the countless other Catholic peacebuilders around the world. One who wanted to be with us but cannot is Archbishop Gabrielle Ketchum, the Holy See's representative to the UN. He has graciously taken the time to record a 20-minute special message for this conference on the Holy See's work for peace at the UN. It will be posted on the conference website this morning, and I strongly encourage you to take the time to watch it. It's an excellent message. Two other peace builders who are not with us today are Father Drew Christensen of Georgetown University's Berkeley Center and Father Bob Schreiter of the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, both of whom passed away in the last year. This conference is dedicated to them in recognition of their indispensable peacebuilding work and their 2 decades of collaboration with the Catholic Peacebuilding Network. May they rest in peace. Before turning to the substance of this opening plenary, I want to thank the 24 co-sponsors of this conference. There are too many to name, so please consult the list in the conference program. I want to especially thank Notre Dame's Kroc Institute, which funds CPN's Secretariat and has devoted considerable resources to this conference. We are also grateful that the Vatican Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development and Caritas Internationalis, 2 Vatican agencies, were willing to collaborate with us on this conference and so many other initiatives. And in particular, I want to introduce and thank Cesar Montevecchio, Veronica Voss, and Father Bill Headley of the CPN Secretariat, who have worked tirelessly to make this conference a reality, along with Tim Checkley and Notre Dame's IT specialist. They will be working from early morning until late at night this week to ensure that things run smoothly. The conference site, which is called the Lobby, has all the information you need for this conference. Note that that includes an expo area with information on a variety of peacebuilding organizations from around the world. Now that's an overview of the conference. Now for this morning's program. We begin with Archbishop Luis José Rueda. He is Archbishop of Bogota and President of the Episcopal Conference of Colombia. This conference was originally to be hosted by Caritas Colombia and the Bishop's Social Pastoral Secretariat, along with Javeriana University, to be held in Bogota. But due to ongoing COVID restrictions, we reluctantly decided to hold the event virtually. We are fortunate that Archbishop Rueda, who would have welcomed us in Bogota, took time to send a recorded message. He did so 2 days ago, just before Colombia's historic runoff election for president. Let's watch his video message.
Hablar de esperanza en tiempos de crisis, en tiempos de fragilidades, en tiempos de pruebas, puede ser difícil o puede sonar como demagogia. Pero recordemos que para los que creemos en Cristo Jesús, la esperanza es una virtud teologal. ¿Qué significa eso? Que es un don que se pide, que se recibe y que se complementa con la racionalidad humana, con la sabiduría humana, con las opciones que nosotros hacemos. En ese marco quisiera hablar en 3 momentos de lo que es la esperanza, cómo vivir la esperanza, cómo hablar de la esperanza, cómo ser testigos de esa esperanza. Primero, la realidad no la podemos negar. La realidad tenemos que amarla así como está, con todas las pruebas que la humanidad tiene. La pandemia nos ha mostrado la gran fragilidad. Tenemos avisos de guerra en distintos lugares del mundo. Tenemos violencia interna en los países. Tenemos hambre que azota a la humanidad y pobreza extrema. Tenemos muchos conflictos por solucionar. Alguien pudiera decir, este es el tiempo del suicidio personal y social, no hay salida. Pero esa realidad que nosotros amamos, esa realidad que constatamos así como está, así como es, así como se nos presenta, es una realidad que va entretejiendo los hilos de la fragilidad humana con los hilos del reino de Dios. El Concilio Vaticano II, hablando de los gozos y las esperanzas, nos mostró cómo el reino de Dios está presente en el acontecer de la historia de la humanidad. Por tanto, sin negar la realidad, sin inflarla de una manera optimista exagerada, pero asumiéndola como está y amando la realidad como está, somos realmente capaces de ver esos hilos conductores de la esperanza que necesitan ser entretejidos para que personal y socialmente logremos construir en ese escenario nuevas oportunidades, nuevos caminos, que se abran puertas y que haya amaneceres. Primer punto entonces, mirar la realidad tal como está para poderla transformar y para poder encontrar los hilos del reino de Dios allí en esa historia que estamos viviendo. Segundo momento, es necesario que nosotros tengamos unas luces de esperanza desde el Evangelio, que es la fuente de esperanza máxima, que es Cristo Jesús y su anuncio del reino, pero también de la doctrina social de la Iglesia. Y quisiera recordar que el Papa Benedicto nos ofreció su encíclica Spe Salvi, para decirnos que todos los seres humanos, todas las sociedades necesitan pequeñas y grandes esperanzas, pero que la esperanza no es algo que nos saca de la realidad, no es algo que nos hace evadirnos del presente, es algo que llena de sentido incluso los momentos de prueba. Es la gran esperanza, y esa gran esperanza es el Dios viviente, el Dios cercano, el Dios que se inclina a la pobreza nuestra, a nuestras fragilidades y a nuestros dolores, el Dios que se hizo niño en el vientre de la Virgen María, el Dios con rostro y el Dios que prometió: yo estaré con ustedes todos los días hasta el fin del mundo. Cuando nosotros leemos ese mensaje poderoso de la encíclica Spe Salvi, sentimos que la verdadera, la única esperanza que nos da vida y que nos estimula a trabajar lo que hablábamos en el primer momento, los hilos de la esperanza en la realidad que nos corresponde vivir con todas las contrariedades, entonces sentimos que Dios, el que eleva las potencias humanas, las posibilidades humanas para construir el reino de Dios y mostrarnos caminos nuevos de vida, de paz, de reconciliación, de desarrollo humano integral. Dado el primer paso de la constatación de la realidad e iluminada esta realidad con la palabra del Evangelio y con el magisterio de la Iglesia, ahora corresponde actuar. Y pudiéramos pensar en acciones a largo plazo, pero es necesario que nosotros allí donde vivimos, donde trabajamos, podamos ser promotores de esa esperanza, constructores de ese tejido del reino, que podamos nosotros aportar desde nuestra forma de ser, desde nuestra forma de pensar, que nos pongamos en el camino de celebrar los pequeños logros de la humanidad, los acontecimientos que nos permiten a nosotros ser anunciadores de la esperanza. Cuando los bautizados, hombres y mujeres en todos los lugares, somos capaces de ser misioneros de la esperanza, es porque amamos la realidad así como está y porque no nos resignamos a tener esa realidad pasivamente. Somos capaces de transformarla porque sentimos la presencia de Dios. Por eso, volvamos a la premisa inicial. La esperanza es una virtud teologal que requiere los panes y los peces, las vasijas llenas de agua, para que Dios haga la obra en usted, en cada uno de nosotros y en nuestras comunidades. Que el Señor nos permita transformar la realidad en un mundo más humano, en un mundo más fraterno, en un mundo más compasivo, en una cultura de la misericordia donde todos podamos encontrarnos y saber que todos nos necesitamos, que en este camino que estamos realizando nadie sobra y que no podemos ser indiferentes al dolor, a la herida, a las llagas, a los sufrimientos de los demás, y que siempre tendremos algo para aportar desde lo más profundo de nuestra conciencia. Que el Señor bendiga nuestras reflexiones, que el Señor nos anime profundamente y sobre todo que Él nos muestre el camino de la esperanza y de la paz.
Well, again, we are grateful to Archbishop Rueda for taking time amidst a critically important moment in the peace process in Colombia to share his message and call for hope with us. We now turn to, I now turn to our keynote speaker for today, Cardinal Charles Bo, a Salesian priest since 1976 and a bishop since 1990. He has been Archbishop of Yangon, Myanmar since 2003. In 2015, Pope Francis named him the first ever cardinal from Myanmar. He is president of the Catholic Bishops' Conference in Myanmar, as well as the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences, and is co-president of Religions for Peace. He has been an outspoken advocate for the poor, marginalized, and persecuted, and he has worked for democracy, human rights, and peace in his country, as well as around the world. We are proud to be able to claim him as a faithful citizen of the Catholic Peacebuilding Network for the last 2 decades. He is with us online, but because the internet is unreliable and subject to shutdowns without notice, he pre-recorded his talk a few days ago so as to ensure that there would be no interruptions. So thank you for your patience with the second recorded talk.
Dear distinguished guests, dear friends, Minglava, good morning, good evening. It is a great privilege and honor to be invited to address your very important conference on Catholic peacebuilding in times of crisis, hope for a wounded world, and to be so on the theme hope in time of crisis. While the world throughout its history has faced many crises, many dark chapters, and suffered many wounds, recent years appear to have ushered a new dark age across the world. The rise of far-right populism and far-left militancy, of nationalism, extremism, and intolerant secularism in various forms across the Western world, from North America to Europe and across Asia and beyond, has shaken well-established pillars of stability, foundations of tradition, accepted norms and truths and values. The COVID-19 pandemic devastated millions of lives through death, long-term sickness, economic hardship, mental health challenges, and the grief faced by so many who lost loved ones. The virus did not discriminate rich and poor, developed and less developed, free and oppressed countries, all suffered. Wealthier, developed, and democratic countries were better able to weather the storm with the resources to provide furlongs and welfare benefits for those unable to go to work due to lockdowns, to strengthen medical care, to invest in research into vaccines, and to produce and disseminate the vaccines. And with a constitutional and institutional system in place to hold leaders accountable for their decisions. For countries already in poverty, such as my own nation of Myanmar, countless numbers of people died without treatment, without a vaccine, and in destitution, and with no leader held to account. Least of all, the leaders of China, where the virus escaped, the carnage was unleashed, and the pandemic began. But the whole world suffered. And now today, we face a truly horrendous evil war which Vladimir Putin has inflicted on the people of Ukraine with absolutely no justification whatsoever. A war that was unprovoked, unjustified, unjustifiable, and inhumane. A war that threatens not only the people of Ukraine, but the whole world. A war that has inflicted suffering on Ukrainians first and foremost, but has also led to the grief of Russian mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters who see their loved ones forced to serve as Russian soldiers for Putin's wicked war, returning home in body bags. Not all wars are clear-cut. Many are complex, with the wrong on both sides. But Putin's war in Ukraine, it is clear. It is a war between authoritarianism and freedom, between dictatorship and democracy, and between darkness and light, lies and the truth. And then we turn to the region in which I was born and brought up, in which I have always and will always live, and which I will always love, Asia. As president of the Federation of Asia Bishop Conferences, I see the challenges and wounds across the continent. North Korea remains one of the world's most closed countries, ruled by one of the world's most oppressive regimes, now facing the challenge of COVID-19, only recently admitted because it has a regime that rules by lies and by covering the truth. Sri Lanka, an island that has already endured the wounds of civil war and then more recently terrorism, now engulfed in a political turmoil. Even among the region's fragile democracies, religious intolerance is a growing dark cloud in Indonesia and Malaysia. The Philippines have recently elected to replace Rodrigo Duterte, a populist leader who allowed human rights violations with impunity, with Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos, the son of the late dictator. Democracy faces a struggle for survival against resurgent authoritarianism. In China, we see an assault on human rights, the like of which we have not seen the Tiananmen Square massacre, the 33rd anniversary of which we recently commemorated. Under Xi Jinping, we see the genocide of the Uyghurs, continued atrocities in Tibet, the crime against humanity of forced organ harvesting, a severe crackdown on civil society, lawyers, local and foreign journalists, bloggers, severe persecution of Christians, increasing threats to Taiwan, and the dismantling of Hong Kong's freedoms. Just last month, my brother, Cardinal and fellow Salesian, His Eminence Cardinal Joseph Zen, aged 90, was arrested for the so-called crime of serving a trustee of a Hong Kong foundation that provided legal aid to protesters facing prosecution. How can it be a crime to help accused persons have a legal defense and representation? Please pray for my brother Cardinal Zen and for the people of Hong Kong and all the peoples of China at this time. Brothers and sisters, I have spoken about some of the dark times the world is facing. But before I speak about the theme of my talk, hope, I want, if I may, to bring one other dark corner of the world to your attention. Because I'm very concerned that as the international community focuses on the great many challenges, not least the war in Ukraine, the economic crisis, the aftermath of COVID, climate change, and other issues, all of which require our attention and coordination action. The crisis in my own country, Myanmar, is forgotten. For about half a century, my country was ruled by a succession of military dictatorship. From our independence in 1948, we had a decade of fragile democracy until Niue took power. Fresh elections were held in 1960, and we had 2 years of democracy, until again the military seized power, a coup in 1962, and ruled in various guises, but essentially uninterrupted until 2015. But in 2012, the military-led government embarked on what appeared at the time to be a process of reform, a glimmer of hope. Political prisoners were released, ceasefires in many parts of the country with ethnic groups were agreed, space for civil society and independent media open. And I, along with so many of my fellow citizens and so many people around the world, believe Myanmar was finally set on a path for a better future. That moment of flickering hope lasted just a few years. Even during the time of opening, new dark clouds emerged, the dark clouds of religious nationalism, religious intolerance, and hatred, a campaign of hate speech, discrimination, and violence against the Muslim population in general, and the Rohingyas in particular broke out, leading to atrocities and unspeakable crimes that broke my heart. At the time, the military unleashed new military campaigns, particularly against the predominantly Christian Ketchums as well as Buddhist Shans. It became clear that even if some form of quasi-democracy was dawning, there was a great need for dialogue, reconciliation, and peacemaking among my country's diverse religious and ethnic people. My friends, I have a deep experience of my country's diversity. I am a Burma from the majority population, but within that population, I am a minority as a Christian, as most Myanmars are Buddhist. Within the church, I am a minority because most Christians come from the Kachin, Chin, Karen, and Kareni populations. I have been viewed with suspicion as a Christian by Burmas and as a Burma by Christian brothers and sisters. As a young priest and as a bishop, my ministry was in the ethnic area in northern Shan State and in Karen areas. I learned their languages and I learned the importance of dialogue, understanding, and breaking down the barriers. Hope in time of crisis, my friends, can be found in small acts of conversation and communication, appreciating one another's differences and celebrating what we have in common. Hope in time of crisis comes from seeing the imago Dei, image of God, in the other, recognizing that through their customs, culture, language, food, or religion may be different from my own. It is in that diversity that we can find the unity through that discover hope. But I won't pretend that when the military seized power in a coup yet again on 1st of February 2021, hopes were not dashed. They were very severely. In the almost 18 months since the coup in Myanmar, over 1 million have been internally displaced, according to the United Nations. The Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, AAPP, reports that under 14,000 people have been arrested and almost 11,000 are still detained. Over 1,800 have been killed. And those are only the recorded statistics. Earlier this month, Myanmar's junta announced that it will execute a former legislator from Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy, NLD party, along with a prominent pro-democracy activist in the country's first judicial execution since 1990. Former MP Pheu Zato and the activist Umin Yu, better known as Ko Chimi, will be hanged according to prison procedures the regime declared. While the military has killed thousands of people, it has not used the death penalty judicially in more than 3 decades. As Cardinal of Myanmar, I plead from the very depths of my heart with the junta not to hang these men, and I appeal to the world to act. If the regime goes through with this, it marks a new law for this already brutal, barbaric, inhumane, and criminal junta. The people of Myanmar for over a year have endured a triple warming crisis with suffering as a consequence of COVID-19, coup, and conflict. They face a human rights, humanitarianism, economic, and political catastrophe. And in the midst of this crisis, the church again is enduring its calvary. So many of our churches have been bombed, desecrated, or damaged. Priests and lay people arrested, tortured, killed, church and NGOs restricted or targeted. So to ask me to speak about hope in time of crisis is both apposite and appropriate as well as challenging. Friends, I have painted a picture of some of the world's wars so far. We all know there are more issues I could touch on. I have not spoken about the Middle East, Yemen, Sudan, Afghanistan, or climate change. But this talk is about hope in time of crisis. And I want to address the question of hope, not only focus on the crisis. For we as a people of faith are an Easter people, and that means we are, whatever the circumstances, a people of hope. Where does our hope come from, and how do we sustain it? I want to respond to that question with the two particular passages of a Holy Scripture. The first is from St. Paul's letter to the Philippians, chapter 4, verse 13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. This is my motto as a priest, bishop, as well as a cardinal. Omnia possum in eo. As we reflect on that verse, let's remember the verses immediately preceding it. Verse 11 says, "For I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances." And the verse 12 says, "I know what is to be in need. I know what is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want." What this passage tells us is that we should not be defined by our circumstances. That is easy to say and harder to fulfill, but is still a vital guide. If we put our hope in Him, who strengthens and guides us, we can have hope, eternal hope, hope shaped not by the times, but by our destiny. That can transcend our fears, our heartache, our trials, and tribulations. Such hope does not take away the pain of the tragedies and challenges we live through. It is not some form of anesthesia that numbs us and makes us feel nothing. On the contrary, as a people of faith and hope, we feel the pain of the world's crisis all the more, as does our Lord. But the hope that gives our Lord strength to endure the cross is one we, if we are united with Him, will give us some strength to endure our hardships and reach out to others to offer that hope to them. The second passage to which I wish to refer is from St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13. Love, it says, is patient, kind, it does not boast, it does not be proud, it is not rude, self-speaking, self-seeking, and is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Crucially, St. Paul emphasizes that while we on this earth must have faith, hope, and love, and we only have part of the picture, we do not have all the answers. Indeed, there is so much we do not know. Now, we see but a poor reflection as in a mirror that we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. In other words, life is a journey to our destination in eternity, and we must keep journeying. As we do so, we begin to form a picture which will be completed when we reach our destination. That surely gives us hope. The famous passage ends with these words, "And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love." If we have love for one another, then that will give us hope. If we have love our communities, our countries, our brothers, our sisters in humanity, our values, our goals, we will not lose hope. But if there is one caveat, do we understand truly deeply what love means? For the love St. Paul speaks of, and to which I refer, is not a narrow, selfish love. It's not the love simply for our own kind, a love for which we share your faith, a love for those who think as you do, a love for those who look like you do, a love for those who speak your language. Of course, it includes them, but it does not and must not stop with them. Instead, it is a bold, outward-looking, sacrificial love, a risky and dangerous love. On the wall of my dining room in Archbishop House in Yangon hangs a picture, a painting, which inspires me daily. It is of the cross with a cloth draped over it, as is our custom during Lent, as we remember our Lord's Passion before celebrating His resurrection. On it are these words, "I asked Jesus, how much do you love me? This much," He answered, and He stretched out His arms and died. In so many places around the world, people are enduring their Golgothas and Calvaries, walking their way of the cross. My own country, Myanmar, suffered over half a century of carrying the cross, then apparently enjoying a decade of flickering resurrection before being plunged back into the dark of crucifixion. Whether we are carrying our cross or rising from it, we must hold on to hope. Not a false hope, not the Hollywood hope, not the hope of romantic happy endings that we see in the movies, but a gritty, earthly, real hope, grounded in our real source of strength, our crucified and risen Lord. The question now, friends, is what we do with that hope? After all, it is no good sitting around comfortably and inactively through times of crisis saying, "I have hope," but doing nothing with it. Hope is not like a large cake that will be brought to you and which you can lazily devour. Hope is more like a petrol. It is fuel provided to equip you to break through the crisis. And if you light the match of faith and the match of love to the petrol of hope, you have a fire that will carry you forward through all adversity. Sometimes the flame blazes, other times the flame flickers, but never, ever let the flame go out. In St. John's Gospel, the message is clear. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And we must never allow the darkness to overcome it. We must take the flame of hope into three spheres. The first is the sphere of dialogue, peace building, conflict resolution, and reconciliation. The second is the pursuit of justice, accountability, and truth. The third is the provision of humanitarian assistance, food, shelter, medicine, education, all the means of survival for those who need it. As I said earlier, our love cannot be restricted to those who believe, think, or look the same as us. We must be beacons of light and life well beyond our communities. That is why I place such a priority on the building relationships, friendships, dialogue with Buddhists, Muslims, and Hindus, and with my Protestant brothers and sisters in Myanmar and around the world. It is why I treasure the work of Religions for Peace and Organization. I'm privileged to serve as a co-president. When Pope Francis visited Myanmar in November 2017, the first Pope ever to visit my country, one of the highlights was that accompanying him to meet Buddhists and Muslims leaders in an attempt to douse the flames of religious hatred, intolerance, and extremism. When we have hope in time of crisis, that hope should turn into an outstretched hand of friendships to others who may have different beliefs but the same humanity. And when we have hope in time of crisis, we should deploy that hope to build bridges between peoples, ethnicities, and cultures, and to break down barriers and pursue peace. Peace is the path we must pursue. Peace is the only way. But true peace must be grounded in the values of the second pillar I outlined earlier, the pursuit of justice, accountability, and the truth. Peace, dialogue, reconciliation can only be achieved when wrongs are acknowledged, truth is upheld, and those responsible for terrible crimes, atrocity crimes, are held accountable and justice is done. The teaching of the Church is abundantly clear. Truth and reconciliation go together, and justice and peace walk hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. It is an impossibility. Lastly, if we are to be agents of hope in times of crisis, we cannot only be about words, we must also be about action. Throughout the world, in my own country of Myanmar, millions are displaced, living as refugees, enduring dire poverty, deprived of healthcare, basic healthcare, shelter, food, and education. We must increase our efforts to provide their needs. Without food on the table, a roof over their heads, some basic treatment of illness, and basic schooling for children, how can people be expected to engage in what we may seem to them abstract concepts of hope, faith, and love? These values must be tangible. The body of Christ, represented most supremely in the Blessed Sacrament, which sustains us all daily, must also develop hands and feet, the hands of those from church charities and others who provide humanitarian assistance, the feet of those who go to the darkest corners of the world to bring food for the body and food for the soul. Saint Teresa, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, wrote the following words, which are inscribed on the walls of the children's home in Calcutta, and they provide a basic guide for us all for how to build the peace in time of crisis and how to find hope for a wounded world. She said, people are often unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some false friends and some true enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and frank, people may cheat you. Be honest and frank anyway. If you spend years building, someone could destroy overnight. Build anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, they may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today, people will forget often tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be enough. Give the world the best you have got. Give anyway. You see the final analysis. It is between you and your God. It was never between you and them anyway. My brothers and sisters, we live in a time of real trial, a time of war, of disease, of climate change, of threats to religious freedom, and scandal of human trafficking, with which I am deeply engaged through my role in the Santa Marta group of unprecedented displacement and the refugees follows. How do we have hope? We have hope through immersing our mind, intellect, heart and soul and spirit in the body of Christ, and through Him in the body of Catholic social teaching. We do it through prayer and action, by taking time to step back, pray, meditate, reflect, and then by acting. Never is it one or the other. Never just contemplative. Never just the activist. Always by combining the two, prayer and action. As it says in St. James chapter 2, verse 14 to 26, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such a faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. You believe that there is one God, good. Even the demons believe that and shattered. We live our faith and our hope through our action for others. And we can be so inspired by reading the great encyclicals, especially of St. John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and the Pope Francis. By embracing the spirit of Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, and by remembering, as the Holy Father writes in Laudato Si, the Spirit of God has filled the universe with possibilities, and therefore, from the very heart of things, something new can always things emerge. As Pope John the 23rd said, the secret of everything is to let yourself be carried by the Lord and to carry the Lord. As St. Pope John II said, "Duc in ardum." These words bring out for us today, and they invite us to remember the past with gratitude, enthusiasm for the moment, and to look forward with hope for the future. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It is with that knowledge that we can always have a hope. Thanks for your attention.
Peacebuilders must speak truth to power. I think you'll agree that Cardinal Bo just showed us exactly how to do that. Thank you, Your Eminence, for such a comprehensive overview of the crises facing the world in your beloved Myanmar. And thank you for your spiritual and pastoral reflection on how to maintain a sense of Christian hope amidst the repression, violence, and injustice that surrounds you. Know that you inspire us, and we remain in solidarity with you in your courageous ministry. As you see in the program, we asked two peace builders doing very different kinds of work in very different contexts to respond to Cardinal Bo's talk. Unfortunately, one of our respondents, Marguerite Byrne-Kesey, had to cancel on short notice due to illness. She is a renowned peace builder, the founder of Maison Shalom, which has helped thousands of orphan children in Burundi. Please keep her in your prayers. Scott Appleby is Dean of the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame. He previously served as director of the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. A professor of history and author of 15 books and hundreds of articles, he is one of the world's leading scholars of religion and global affairs. One of the founders of the Catholic Peacebuilding Network, he is editor with Father Bob Schreiter and me of Peacebuilding, Catholic Theology, Ethics, and Practice. Thank you for joining us, Scott.
Thank you, Jerry, and greetings to everyone from Bologna, Italy, where the European Academy of Religion is meeting this week. Among the signs of hope here are the panels exploring and advocating for a new initiative on interreligious encounter, dialogue, and collaboration between religious communities and European governments in pursuit of human fraternity and inclusive citizenship, an initiative inspired by and resonant with Pope Francis's vision of fraternity and social friendship presented in Fratelli Tutti. I begin with an expression of heartfelt gratitude to Cardinal Bo from all of us for his inspiring, moving, indeed soul-stirring keynote presentation, which we just heard. It was a tapestry woven from seemingly unconnectable threads, a sobering tour of the many evils ravaging the world and its most vulnerable peoples, a lamentation electrified by the Cardinal's prophetic, unsparing indictment of the brutal regime oppressing his own people, and yet somehow also a vivid tapestry of resilience, stitched together from so many sources of Christian resistance to darkness: St. John's Gospel, the letters of Paul, the stubborn compassion of Mother Teresa, and the Cardinal's own insistence, which can in no way be called naive, on faith, hope, and most of all love as the source of redemption for the suffering people of Myanmar and beyond. How can these things go together? Only when love casts out fear. Your Eminence, I've attended many conferences in my time and have forgotten many details of what was said. But I shall never forget the CPN conference of some years ago, which focused on human rights violations around the world, and the call to nonviolence in resistance to evil. During the final session of that conference, you gave witness to the vocation of a bishop in so many regions of the world, the number increasing year by year, where human life seems to be worth nothing, where bloodshed, murder, and impunity is taken for granted. In such settings, you implored us then, a bishop's vocation is martyrdom. I shall never forget the tone of your voice, neither triumphant nor self-pitying, but quietly determined, and yet somehow filled with hope in the final victory of the risen Lord. If we witness no other signs of hope in these 4 days together, Your Eminence, your life and ministry is perhaps all we need to know where true hope lies. Thank you for your ministry, your courage, and your faith. Catholic peacebuilders are frequently called upon to document their progress, to measure concrete change for the good as a result of their labors, in order to reassure their donors and other supporters that faith, hope, and love are not abstract concepts, as Cardinal Bo cautions. To be sure, there are demonstrable, data-like pieces of evidence to suggest why sustained peace building matters enormously. Cardinal Bo enjoins, quote, the provision of humanitarian assistance, food, shelter, medicine, education, all the means of survival for those who need it. Without food on the table, he said, a roof over their heads, some basic treatment for illness, and basic schooling for their children, well, peace means little or nothing. These values must be tangible. And indeed, we can count food delivered, homes rebuilt, schools opened, farmers restored to their livelihoods. However, Cardinal Bo also emphasizes two additional imperatives of peace. First, progress in, quote, the sphere of dialogue, peace building, conflict resolution, and reconciliation. And second, the pursuit of justice, accountability, and truth. The pursuit of justice, accountability, and truth. In these spheres, measuring hope is a trickier business. If we are to measure progress over time, what is the appropriate deadline to show progress for peace builders who attend to victims traumatized by violence, broken and in need of healing? And what does progress look like anyway in such cases? The restoration of a victimized individual or community to something like pre-trauma flourishing of healthy reciprocal relationships? And for peace builders who focus elsewhere, say on processes of dialogue, reconciliation, and reparation, or on the post-war rebuilding of courts and the justice system, or on the demobilization of armed groups, or the provision for youth of alternatives to joining gangs. In all of these settings, the question looms, what are realistic criteria for success? That democracy in some form or human rights in some form will prevail in places like Myanmar or Afghanistan, Venezuela, Ethiopia, or Ukraine? That power in such places and in the West as well will be wielded by honest leaders who will resist the petty or grand larcenies? That villains like Putin will not prevail? Only the naive would make these our metrics. Yes, there are moments when history and hope rhyme, even on this grand scale. Northern Ireland, the South Africa of Mandela, the Philippines after the first Marcos regime. But these moments are rare, often fleeting, and we return to the familiar refrain. Power and greed and corruptible seed seem to be all that there is. And yet, Cardinal Beau's surprising tapestry beckons, quote, whether we are carrying our cross or rising from it, we must hold on to hope, not a false hope, not a Hollywood hope, not a hope of romantic happy endings that we see in the movies, but a gritty, earthy, real hope grounded in our real source of strength, our crucified and risen Lord, close quote. Some years ago, after directing the Kroc Institute for many years, I finally had a long-delayed aha moment, thanks to a group of Maryknoll sisters on retreat who were reading John Paul Lederach's masterwork, The Moral Imagination, The Art and Soul of Building Peace, under my supposed direction. But I was the one needing direction, and the sisters provided it by explaining to me what it really is to build peace. It is not so much the definitive ending of war, the redress of all wounds, the triumph of justice in a given state, the nonviolent resolution of decades-long conflict. Rather, building peace is the creation of small and vulnerable but determined communities of nonviolence, of networks of activists and advocates that create opportunities for resistance and platforms for peace, small at first, but scalable. It is the very act itself of the pursuit of justice and truth, in Cardinal Beau's precise term. It is the striving, the pursuit, the commitment to the thing itself, to the unconditioned horizon of hope, whatever the cost, whatever the eventual outcome. Václav Havel's well-known reflections on hope are relevant here. Either we have hope within us or we do not. It is a dimension of the soul, and it is not essentially dependent on some particular observation of the world. Hope is an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart. It transcends the world that is immediately experienced and is anchored somewhere beyond its horizons. Hope in this deep and powerful sense is not the same as joy that things are going well or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not because it stands a chance to succeed. Hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. It is not the conviction that something will necessarily turn out well, but a certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. It is hope above all, which gives the strength to live and continually try new things. That was Václav Havel. There's great wisdom in what Havel says, but the question before us still looms large. What have peace builders to promise in terms of concrete, constructive, lasting change? Outcomes do matter. I join His Eminence in challenging this conference to address the question, wherein lies our hope? As people of faith, we affirm that our hope lies in Christ. And what do we hope for in Christ? It is one thing to celebrate the swelling tide of religious actors, networks, and churches that seem more invested today than ever in peace building. It is quite another to address concretely the question, and what will we be able to accomplish if we succeed in strengthening the church's sense of peace building as the mission and vocation of every Catholic, not just of the bishops and select laity? What will we be able to accomplish concretely as we build participation in peace building? What is possible for us if that sense of mission and vocation were to shape the priorities of Catholic institutions, groups, and individuals of all kinds and at all levels, not just a small cadre of dedicated peace and justice activists? What will it take for Catholics engaged in disparate and largely uncoordinated action scattered across this peace-building spectrum? What will it take to integrate their work on climate and peace, relief and development, spirituality, and peace? What will be the concrete outcomes, the deliverables, even as we keep hope in our hearts and know that our success does not depend solely on our own efforts? A world in crisis awaits our answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, for those excellent remarks. We don't have a lot of time, but let me just throw one of those two questions back at you. I sent a friend, a good Catholic, the program for this conference, and he replied that the conference looked really interesting for those who are artisans of peace, but I'm a business consultant. I don't do peace. Now, while that answer might sound a bit flippant, I think it reflects a legitimate point that peace building amidst complex crises is serious business, and that requires some specialized expertise, the expertise of diplomats or specialists in trauma healing or human rights lawyers or climate change scientists. So if I specialize in another field like farming or construction or finance, shouldn't I prioritize what I know best and not get into things that I know nothing about? And others, especially pastors or bishops or agencies providing humanitarian relief in conflicted areas, see peace building maybe as too political and divisive, and thus a threat to their ministry and mission. And still others are not willing to invest money and time in peace building if they can't measure the results a bit more precisely than you suggest is possible. So let me just throw those questions back, and my take on those, your question back at you, and get your response to some of those legitimate concerns.
Those are great questions, Jerry, and I'll have just the beginning of an answer to them. Not because we have limited time, but because I have limited capacity to answer the question. But I would say this, I would begin by saying I think there's a false choice embedded in the question. And the choice is between pursuing one's own profession and self-interest on the one hand, and being engaged in peace building on the other, or even in support of professional peace builders in one way or another. And it goes back to the question of self-interest. I've heard this argument, well, peace doesn't affect me, it's not my bottom line. And that seems to be almost an obtuse response when anyone's business is automatically affected by stability or instability. We are frustrated at times at Notre Dame, as you know, and I'm sure at other Catholic universities, other institutions, when we don't get as much response from some very devout Catholics on the question of refugees and migration and the inherent moral imperative for Catholics, for Christians to welcome the refugee. So I am reduced to making the argument that this is in your own self-interest. You want stable environment for business. You want the safety and security of your own family. You can no longer hide from global crises. And so the banker, the lawyer, the teacher who is not already engaged in some important way in what we call here as insiders the building of peace, and who is not open to the answers we would give to the question of why peace, that person is not acting in their own self-interest. If their analysis of what's happening in the world in this time of crisis that Cardinal Bo elaborated only in part, one only needs to look around and have any kind of perception about the threats to their own families, even if they don't particularly think deeply about others who they don't see regularly. So I think there's a false choice there. And I think we have to, through preaching, through networking, through communication, through building community, have to put before those who are not currently in the circle of peace builders what's at stake for their lives. And we have to do it, I think, dramatically, because the stakes are high and indeed dramatic.
We heard today from two bishops who are they're peace building bishops who are really in the thick of things in Colombia and Myanmar. And there's a tendency among Catholics, and I think also among those outside who in the wider world, to look to priests and bishops to take the lead on peace building. But the Second Vatican Council said it's the laity who have the principal responsibility for transforming the world in light of the gospel. And you're an educator, you've been an educator your whole life. How do you see the role of the laity? How can we do better at promoting lay leadership in these often conflicted and controversial and political peace and building questions that we have to address?
You know, Jerry, firsthand how we've tried to grapple with that important question at the Kroc Institute over the years, and you've been part of the answer. And what I will say will sound very modest to listeners because it's a big, big challenge. But what we need to do, among other things, is provide laity with professional opportunities, with jobs, with career paths, with internships. You know, at Notre Dame, at Georgetown, at Boston College, the places we know, but there are places around the world. Those apologize for the US references, but all over the world, there are academies still, seminaries, but here let me speak of universities, of the education of lay people in particular, where we have so many committed, idealistic in the best sense, talented young people. But at the end of the day, the challenge is being able to place them in even a first appointment, a first job, a first professional opportunity. The reason I began by mentioning your own efforts, Jerry, is that we have sponsored internships at the Vatican and in peace building organizations. We continue to do that. It's a modest effort in a way, but if we could think about ways in which peace building becomes a viable option, technical, well-trained, well-educated, professional peace builders, that this becomes a viable option, not only for those select few, and God bless them, who can make it in an organization as powerful as Catholic Relief Services, which hires our students and others every year and does terrific work. But that's a drop in the bucket in terms of who's available and who at a relatively young age is willing to commit to a professional career in these areas. It's not just CRS that has openings. There are many, many agencies. We could do better as educators, much better, in letting our students know what's available and in doing our own networking for our students and encouraging these vocations of peace building and a professional path to peace building. I don't think we do as well, even though we've given some attention to it. So that's just one answer to a very good question. Try to find ways to provide a path forward that is viable, especially for young people who need to earn a living wage who want to contribute their time and talents to the work of peace, but who frankly don't know where to go after they've graduated from one of our universities or schools around the world.
My own sense is that we need to maybe do a better job at talking about and helping people be formed in their lay vocation, so that they have a deep sense of, inspired by their faith, of how to integrate their faith into their work, whether they're scientists, whether they're a lawyer, a doctor, or whatever they might do. And that's hard to do. And that goes to your second point about the importance of integration. You do integration for a living, and that you're creating a new school that is trying to integrate 10 or 11 separate institutes that deal with different parts of aspects of global affairs. And Pope Francis in Laudato Si talks about how everything is connected. Cardinal Bo talked about how complex these problems are and how you need to address multiple dimensions of peace building. So integration is the challenge. Everybody talks about it, but it's a lot harder to do than it is to talk about. What are your thoughts on integration?
A number of thoughts. I'm going to start with a really concrete sign of hope. That's our topic. And I recall, and you will too, Jerry, and Father Bill Headley, among others who might be listening, some years ago when the Catholic Peacebuilding Network, 2003 or so, was formed, and even before and after that, we educators were doing some work, learning ourselves what peacebuilding really entails and the complexity of it and the need for integration and the different dimensions of it. We were learning this. And I remember distinctly, we visited a seminary, I think we were in Baltimore, perhaps, and there was a meeting of African bishops and American bishops. Again, this was 20, 30 years ago. And we made presentations, just as you and I did in the Philippines, to the bishops of Mindanao. We did, in the case of these African bishops, made presentations about peace building. And I myself, at that point, 20 years ago or so, thought, well, these bishops they're committed. They understand peace building. They are, after all, priests. They are bishops. They are called to be disciples of the Prince of Peace. And we found right away that, of course, what a foolish thing to think. They are not trained, technically, were the bishops, to comprehend and practice this range of increasingly complex and somewhat technical positions that we see on this big peace building spectrum, from trauma healing to professional reconciliation efforts, et cetera. But the church has been drawn into those. So that was 20 years ago. What do we see now? We see Cardinal Bo. We see Cardinal Onai. You can mention just a surge among the bishops themselves worldwide, not only of endorsing and preaching about peace, doing that, but also engaging. And this is not the work of the bishops alone. Let me hasten to add, of course, but just in that area of the church, we see leadership now that has emerged and can understand the comprehensive, integrated nature of peace building. They understand and can preach about the vocational aspect of it. If we don't do better, apart from that, I think, hopeful sign of the church engaging institutionally in peace building as it has begun to do, if we don't understand the relationship between conflict prevention, trauma healing, reconstitution of justice systems, food security, all of these elements of a stable and somewhat just society, then our efforts will be siloed, isolated, and they will fail. So I've always thought the conceit has been what we want to promote and train and educate are synthetic, synoptic thinkers who will have some expertise in one or more of these areas, yes, but who can see the interrelationship and can help to direct people and to coordinate them in their respective areas of expertise. Training those leaders, training people who see the bigger picture and see how things fit together, that goes on in agencies like CRS all the time, but we need more of it. We need more conversation across sectors of the Catholic world, the universities, the institutional church, missionary groups, relief and development organizations. And we do these things happenstance in a way. I see that Cardinal Bo has joined us, so why am I still speaking? If Cardinal Bo wants to say something, I'm going to shut up.
Your Eminence, would you like to say a concluding
No, I'm
word?
just listening. Scott, there.
I'm afraid we might have a poor connection.
Oh, there he is.
No, I'm just listening. I'm just following. Please continue. Scott, long time no see.
Well, I'm afraid, thank you, Your Eminence, for joining us. I wish we could have, the internet was more reliable. We could have heard from you directly, but you had a wonderful presentation. We very much appreciate that. I'm afraid we're out of time.
I would simply
Oh,
add,
sorry.
Gerard, that I would simply add that I'm honored that I got the hook by Cardinal Bo, that he came in to save the day and shut me up. I appreciate that, Your Eminence. We needed an authority of your kind to get me off the stage, so thank you.
Thank you.
This has been, I thank you, the audience, all of you who are watching, for your patience. This has been more talking heads than we will have in the other sessions of this conference. It was just the particular nature of the opening session. But we will have much more room for discussion and questions from the audience in future sessions. A forthcoming issue of the Journal of Social Encounters is going to be devoted to peace-building bishops. And we've been very fortunate to have with us today remarks from two of the world's most prominent peace-building bishops. And also, Scott Appleby is not a bishop, but he's a dean, and deans are very much like bishops, and he's very much a peace builder. So thank you, Scott, also for joining us. This opening plenary has reinforced two convictions that underlie this conference. First is the theology of hope matters. The sheer magnitude of the world's interconnected crises generates denial, indifference, despair, cynicism, fatalism. And the antidote is to combine a sober realism and concrete plans of action with more effective efforts to cultivate a theology and ethics and spirituality of hope. And second, Catholic peacebuilding matters. The world's crises require concerted action by all of humanity. Catholics do not have a corner on the peacebuilding market, to be sure. But the Catholic community does bring something distinctive to the peacebuilding enterprise, as do all other peace builders bring something distinctive. And we should celebrate and cultivate what is both distinctive and what is common with other peace builders. And that always needs strengthening. So we thank you for being with us for this opening plenary. I hope you can join us for our other plenaries, which will be the next 3 days at the same time. I also hope you can join us for the other 4 panels today. At 1 o'clock Eastern Time USA, we have panels on the Church's role in truth and reconciliation processes and on shaping a culture of peace building through spirituality. And at 8 p.m. Eastern Time USA, we have a workshop on Catholic Relief Services social cohesion tool and a panel on environmental peace building. So thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Cardinal Bo. And thank you, Archbishop Rueda. Have a good day, and I hope to see some of you later on today.